Morning, everyone. This is Charles from support. I'm covering for today's office hours topic, the support raised cases. The first case that we've been seeing a lot of is gateway upgrades recently. Gateway has a end of service for 10.0. The end of service is coming up very soon at the end of this month. The end of service is as of 3/31. It's recommended to be upgraded to 11.0 or 10.1. Covering 10.1 first, but I'll be covering some common problems on or questions on 11.0 shortly. 10.1 upgrades are a in-place upgrade, so the 10.0 OVA and the 10.1 OVA are both CentOS based. I have a link on a knowledge base, and you'll see multiple knowledge base articles within the recording here, and the links are not shareable via the recording, but if you do a search, these article IDs at the end of the link, in this case 240960, are going to be extremely valuable. So if you were to do a common search for Broadcom space support space the article ID, which is 240960, you will very likely find this as your first hit. In this knowledge base of steps that you can follow to upgrade your appliance, we also note some problems that people have run into on their 10.0 to 10.1 upgrade. The 10.1 upgrade has a new Jackson library upgrade, and JSON schema v2 has been deprecated. Going along with that, the JSON schema, if you have external references in the actual schema itself to, for example, www.example.com, I've seen a number of times. If this gateway has no access to that site, it may take a long time to start up. It may take 2 minutes for every reference for the connect timeout. So one of the key things you want to do prior to a 10.0, 10.1 upgrade is validate your JSON schema assertions and make sure that they are updated and not referencing an external site unless this gateway has external connectivity to that site. Another problem we've been seeing in the 10.0 to 10.1 upgrades is customers who have updated their appliancedefs.sh, either with custom garbage collection flags, third-party items like a New Relic or Dynatrace or other hooks into the JVM. Seen a number of gateway won't start issues. A lot of these have to do with the JDK 11 upgrade and old flags that were accepted in 1.8, and if you do run into a gateway won't start type problem, you probably first want to visit your appliance defs, because if Java gets invalid flags and Java won't start, the gateway won't start. In 10.1 or 10.0, the TLS v1 was deprecated but not removed. In 10.1, TLS v1 and 1.1 have been removed. If you need to add those back, you should be updating the new SSG security file. Out of the box, only TLS 1.2 and 1.3 is available. So if you are upgrading and for some reason do not have TLS v1.2 or above enabled on your listen ports, or you need those for backward compatibility, you're going to want to make sure you update the SSG security file. (10.1) CR1 upgrades, actually CR1 Plus. CR1 Plus had a Tomcat upgrade. Two notable problems or issues customers have run into on CR1 and above on 10.1, in addition to the existing 10.1 base items already covered. was, for one, there was a HTTP status change, which could affect your load balancers. Previously, the status when you would hit the gateway would return a 200 space OK. Some people reported that their load balancers were looking for the OK reason phrase. Due to that Tomcat upgrade, the OK had been removed, and now it's just a HTTP status of 200. So for your inbound load balancers, when you do this upgrade, you're going to want to make sure that it's not looking for the reason phrase because it will no longer exist. Another problem or thing to note, let's say, in the CR1 upgrade is that the Tomcat upgrade affected the concurrency and threading. Um, our default values for concurrency were lowered from 10.1 base to 10.1 CR1. That was due to this Tomcat upgrade. We noted issues with that. So for customers that are using higher than default values or very, very high values that they were getting away with in the earlier JDK and Tomcat for core concurrency and max core concurrency, you're going to want to go through and ensure that those values are still working for your current tuning, or possibly go back to the defaults and start doing the tuning exercise again to ensure that you're getting your maximum throughput from the gateway. Both of these changes are referenced in the documentation in the release notes, so you can check the release notes for more information relating to this. Gateway 11.0 is now generally available. It's been generally available since the end of January, so it's almost 2 months now. The biggest reported items in the Gateway 11.0 upgrade, though 11 allows SCP out of the box, it requires the -O flag, which it didn't do in the previous versions. People typically are able to do this from other Linux hosts, use the SCP with the -O flag. People using WinSCP are not going to be able to connect like they used to anymore with SSG config. If WinSCP is your tool of choice, there is a KB that shows how you can use WinSCP and create a new user, and that article has been confirmed and tested by a number of people. Again, to find this article, you're going to look for this article ID 260479. So Broadcom space support space 260479. Similar to our 10.0 KB for upgrades, there's a 11.1 which talks about where to download licenses, install instructions, known issues, and other helpful tips. You're going to want to look for the article ID for that 259250. Gateway 11.0 is a Debian appliance now, so it's not uh, a RHEL derivative, it's not CentOS, it's not RHEL. In Gateway 11 on Debian, the VI editor is no longer there. So if you're using an OVA, Nano is now the editor installed on the system. So you'll have to get used to Nano and the Nano commands. Another big change is for LDAP integrations to SSH. We are now using an underlying component of SSSD, which we had not used in previous versions, but I have seen customers install. That is there now out of the box. Couple special notes for Gateway 11. It has its own major version license. A license update is required. You cannot use a 10.0 license on an 11.0 system. So you're going to want to make sure prior to your Gateway 11 upgrade that you obtain a Gateway 11 license. Gateway 11 has JDBC changes, which is including the removal of the data direct drivers and update to the Cassandra drivers. Your existing data direct, which would be your com.l7 tech related JDBC drivers that you would have created, should still work. We are we do have code that detects these, and it's supposed to try and convert these. But it is a wise choice to take and validate your drivers and update them to one of the MySQL drivers, since we're now using MySQL's drivers instead of Data Direct's. Same for Oracle. We're now using an Oracle driver instead of Data Direct, so be a very good choice to go into your JDBC settings and change your JDBCs right at upgrade time. Monthly platform patches. API Gateway and all versions of appliances contain MySQL 8 in the 10.0 and 11x. Also, other platform libraries like kernel, Python, any platform related items. These are all covered in our monthly platform patch. As the name denotes, this goes out monthly, and it's typically around the 20th of the month. These patches are extremely important to apply monthly and keep up on. Reasons for that is monthly platform patches help to mitigate vulnerabilities as well as your InfoSec scans. Any vulnerability that's related to the version of kernel, of Python, of whatever OS library, of MySQL, most of these InfoSec reports will be resolved by keeping current on the monthly platform patch. If your InfoSec or your concern is around the JDK or the Tomcat libraries themselves, those are not covered on our monthly platform patch. So those are current within the gateway specific RPMs and CRs. So Gateway 10.1 has a slightly older version than Gateway 10.1 CR2, and Gateway 10.1 CR3, which is due out shortly, is going to have a newer version of Java. So if your concerns or your InfoSec scanner is reporting anything relating to JDK or Tomcat libraries, staying current on the CRs of the gateway is going to help you there. But monthly platform patches are extremely important, especially for mitigation of vulnerabilities. Take a step back. We're also going to suggest that prior to opening vulnerability cases, unless it's a brand new vulnerability, it would be a good idea to be on at least the current monthly platform patch. If you're not, that's likely the first thing support's going to request. And depending on what it is, you may need to get to a CR. So keep up on those and stay current, and those will help for not needing to open a support case relating to InfoSec scans. Gateway private key certificate related behavior. This is worth a mention. This is functionality that has been in 10.1 CR2, which has been out for a number of months now. It just seems that people are not noticing this change. In CR2, the gateway now has a functionality to use private keys for your route assertion or trusted certificates in your route assertion from a variable. This allows some dynamicness that you don't get from the existing trust store. So in the properties of the route via HTTPS assertion, there's new options in 10.1 CR2. When you look at the route assertion itself in the trusted TLS certificates dialog, you're going to see that there is trust only specified trusted certificates via context variable. And that allows you to programmatically define the variable used for this trust. Also, when you right click on the route assertion and you go to private keys, where there used to only be two options. Now there is a third, which is to use a dynamic private key. Uh, and the dynamic private key lets you define it via a context variable. Um, there hasn't been any real reports of problems around this. This is just a note because this is functionality that I've pointed out to a couple of people. It seems very useful. People just don't seem to realize it exists. Furthering the gateway certificates and private key behavior. For many people that have been running the gateway since 9x, what they've noted is as they upgrade the versions 9.4 to 10 to 10.1, we've further and further restricted private keys and certificates sharing the same CN. In 9.4 you used to get away with pretty much installing any private key or certificate, whether the CN conflicted with another certificate, whether uh, you know you were going to have duplicates for key update, etc. Um, in 10.0 we got more stringent on that behavior, and in 10.1 we got even more stringent. This seems like it has caused some issues for people that they've had to change how they normally do things, um, and that they just don't prefer this functionality change. We do have a KB, this 233502, which relates to people that have reported issues relating to trying to upload private keys with the new signed CN. Um, and getting key conflict errors, getting that the key is not signed, being that the key is shared from some other entity that is using a different version, etc. Well, due to the desire of many people to have the behavior more like it was in 9.4, it's expected in 10.1 CR3 and the future CRs of 11. The next version of 11 would be 11 CR1. We're going to have a cluster-wide property, and that's going to relax these restrictions of the private key conflict CNs, um, so that you can control this hardened CN requirement and relax it back to the 9x version. I would suggest that if you don't have a pain point with this, that you don't relax it. But if this type of problem has come up for you and you uh, have had this in the past, well, then 10.1 is going to be a good option to take and, you know, resolve this for you. It's going to be controlled again via cluster-wide properties. So you're going to want to check out the release notes when 10.1 CR3 comes out in the very near term. I wanted to take a moment to overview RESTman. Um, Seen a number of cases where, and over the course of a long period of time, where a customer does a get with RESTman. They take this get and they take the entire contents of it, and they try to do a put or a post on another gateway to do an update or that type of thing, and it fails. And it fails with a syntax error, as would likely be expected. Um, the output of a get is not sufficient enough to do a put or a post. Um, I'm going to show you what you're really looking for from a get and a basic way to reformat it. I chose to do a typical get on RESTman 1.0 folders because the folder content itself, the XML, is very small. And the folder I chose to do the get on is this FFFEC76, which is really the base folder for every API gateway. What you'll see is when you do a RESTman get, um, you'll have all this content. You'll have a namespace, a bunch of items, some link dependencies, the resource itself, an item ending. This is not what you need to do a put or a post. What you really need to be focused on is the content between the resource tags. The resource tags you can see in this example are highlighted red. You do not need to include the resource tags, but the main part of what you want for your XML is this in the resource tags, this folder ID, name, and ending folder. You'll see that same basic thing with pretty much every resource on the gateway. You want to grab the main body and the resource tags. That still isn't sufficient to do your put or post typically. You have to make two small changes. Um, so you have to add this XML header. And typically what you do is I've replaced my version with the XML namespace, but you usually need to reference the XML namespace in the main item tag. Then this is pretty much your content for your put or post. So if you look at this, and I'll go backwards so you can compare it to the get. So we see the namespace in the get, but the namespace needs to be here where the version is. But you can see the big variation from this entire amount of content to this small footprint. So when you're doing a RESTman call, please keep in mind that you can't repost your entire get output. You have to take and change it slightly and really focus on the items in the resource tags. I also wanted to take a second to cover the fact that there is a new GraphMan that is still an experimental feature. This new GraphMan utility is going to do many of the things that the current RESTman does. It's much more simplified. It definitely has new features and functions. It does not hit the RESTman endpoint. It is not generally available at the moment, but it is an experimental feature, and if you feel GraphMan can help you, there are communities posts where you can make a request for it on the Broadcom support community. Um, there is also a number of trainings available on our API Academy site. Um, GraphMan itself typically has a Postman collection that goes along with it, so you have all the sample usage. But if GraphMan is interesting to you and you are interested in looking at it, you may want to reach out to us on our Broadcom support site for this utility. Just want to bring up a small item, which is, excuse me, Gateway typically has had customers that are allow audit growth and then they run into space issues or they run into upgrade issues and they want to truncate their audits. People have been using the same truncation of audits procedure that they've gotten from our KBs in 9X and 10 and 11. That procedure to truncate has changed slightly, which is we now suggest after all those truncates to analyze each table. There is an KB that has been out there for some time about this, KB 203056. Would recommend if you're doing an occasional truncates of audits and you have an old process to review this knowledge base. What the analyze itself does is it takes and the MySQL database itself has size pointers, and when you do a truncate, it does not seem to update that the size of these tables have now shrunk so greatly. The analyze forces MySQL to recalculate the space size usage and gives more accurate reporting for those of you that have seen if you have a default audit strategy of stop, audit management strategy of stop cluster-wide property. That's done based on the calculation of 90%, and that's returned from MySQL. So you want that analyze to be done so that you're getting the proper values back from MySQL. So is my strong suggestion that you take and um, take a look at this KB if you're not familiar with that. OTK upgrades. Seeing a number of OTK upgrades lately. The OTK upgrades are really solution kits, and those solution kits work in RESTman bundles that get saved to the database. Um, Tying back to the earlier RESTman, for anybody who's used RESTman bundles, which get created either through the Gateway Migration Utility, otherwise known as GMU, or actually hitting the RESTman bundle endpoint API itself. When a bundle gets created, it gets two parts. The top half of the bundle is the XML, right? Similar to the XML we saw in the RESTman call above. The second part of the bundle is a mapping item. And what mappings does is it says, hey, this is the XML you're going to look for above in your bundle, and this is the action you're going to perform, new, update, etc. Well, when these bundles get created properly, for example, by Gateway Migration Utility, um, they're done in a very specific order. They're done in the order of requirements for that object. So what you'll see is you can't have a service without a folder to live in. So the first item in a um, bundle is going to be the folder. And then if your service, for example, has a route that uses a private key, well, you can't have this service without the reliant private key being on your gateway. So the next one after the folder may be the private key. Um, then you may see the service now that you have the dependency satisfied. Same if you had a JDBC, the JDBC driver would be referenced prior to the service. Well, an uninstall of a bundle has the same thing in the reverse order. So it would remove your service, then it would remove your private key if required, and then it would remove your folder. When we do our install, we expect all these things to be just like just like we installed them. So one of the most common issues I've seen with upgrades is that you get a screen that comes up and you get a whole bunch of red dependencies. There's no error information or corrective action on that screen. Sometimes if you click on the item, there's a resolve button, but the resolve doesn't allow you to resolve it. Typically, when you get this pop-up with a whole bunch of red items, if you look at the gateway logs, you'll actually see that it's calling RESTman in a test of the bundle and the test of removing items, and it's failing. Typically, if you look at that message or provide that to support in the SSG log, you're going to find a very specific failure, and the first failure is the one to key in on. Typically, that's going to be like removal of a folder or removal of an RBAC role or a role, um, tip or removal of an encapsulate assertion. Um, the the reason this occurs typically is someone has created a custom item. Someone has cloned, I don't know, a policy, for example, OAuth manager, and kept it in our OTK folder. Um, when we go to delete the folder, since we didn't delete the new copy of the uh, item, we can't delete the folder. So you have to be very careful with any customizations to OTK. Same thing if you're creating users that have zones associated with them or roles associated with them, default roles. Um, you really want to be careful and note any custom work you do because that could be a blocker when you're doing an upgrade. Um, strongly suggest not to put anything in the OTK folders. That is not a suggested thing to do. You can make your own folder, you can post it in your own folder, but we'd strongly suggest you do not add it into our existing folder. So when you get these failures, just think of it as if you try to delete an item in Policy Manager and you got an error, right? You can't delete this fragment because it's used by some other item. You can't delete this because it's in use by something else. Like I said, you'll see it in the SSG log. It'll be fairly evident what the first failure is, and then what needs to happen is that needs to be backtracked. But for future, if you try not to add custom items to the installed OTK, you're very likely to have better success in upgrades. The next item I wanted to bring up was I just wanted to include real quick in this presentation. These are the top 10 KBs that have had views on, and because of such, I just figured I'd bring them to attention. Since other people, obviously, they've viewed them a lot, they're used a lot. I apologize again that you can't get this directly from the WebEx recording, but any of these numbers, Broadcom support, and any of these numbers will bring you to uh, pretty close to the page that is this knowledge base article. Small description on each side, log4j, reinitializing replication, certificate errors, HSTS header, root password maintenance, the Gateway 11 FAQ. Um, Hopefully, you may want to take a peek at any of these since they're a high view rate and other customers have viewed them, they may pertain to something helpful if you haven't seen them before. My last item is just a simple request for helping us when you open a case, us in support. Um, Common suggestions would be if you open a problem which is related to unexpected policy behavior, when you open that case, if you could include the exact problem and or error uh, syntax, preferably in text form instead of just a screenshot, um, or maybe both. Um, a copy of the policy and any encapsulated assertions, especially if this is related to policy behavior or unexpected response or anything like that. A copy of the request and response for that policy. Um, I typically like to take a policy if someone provides it and scale it down to the least amount of assertions that I need. So if you know your problem with it is with regex, instead of giving a 50-line policy, maybe a 3-line policy with context variable setting the request value instead of having to supply the request. Your regex that you're struggling with, for example, after that, and your return template response, right? The least amount of items in the policy. That way, there's less cause for confusion and less cause for uh, keying in on wrong items. As mentioned, context variables can set message variables, and they can set your request and your response. So unless your request needs to be in curl or postman or whatever, a way to simplify a policy and be able to just get it with, I don't know, a browser is to define these context variables. But having those policies as samples so we can see what's going on is really very helpful to us. DCT tool is an extremely valuable tool, um, especially when it relates to performance issues, but not limited to performance issues. It definitely gives us a good background as to what's been going on. You know, what it gives us viewpoints into the system that we don't get in other cases. So, um, if you don't provide that because it's a large file, support may request it. It runs slightly differently on containers. It also may need installation on software installs. Uh, and if you look at or support will provide this link, it's basically opdct collect sh with options. I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to me, and I appreciate that, and I want to wish you a wonderful day. Thank you.